The aliens laughed when they saw the sticks raised against them. 1,000 meters above the ground, their silver-armored soldiers hovered in glimmering exosuits, weapons glowing with an energy humanity could not begin to comprehend. On the earth below, villagers stood with sharpened branches, clubs, and even one man holding a broom handle with a kitchen knife taped to it. It was a scene so absurd that the aliens opened a live broadcast to their homeworld, convinced this moment would be remembered forever as comedy. One alien, translating through the ship's speakers, chuckled and declared in a booming voice, "You bring sticks to face the might of the Empire." The crowd of villagers trembled, but one old man spat on the ground and muttered, "Better than nothing." That was the moment the laughter began to die. The invasion had started like lightning. Skies darkened with the silhouettes of ships the size of mountains. Cities watched in terror as their militaries crumbled within days. Tanks melted, jets exploded mid-air, missiles detonated harmlessly before impact. The aliens possessed weapons that bent reality itself, and to them, Earth was not a battlefield but a playground. The village of Harfield was far from major cities, a forgotten place where electricity flickered more often than it stayed, and yet it was here the aliens landed to make an example. They marched through wheat fields and cobblestone streets with their glowing armor, announcing in their strange voices that Earth belonged to them. No one could resist. But Harfield's people were stubborn, and stubbornness often makes fools do reckless things. They gathered whatever they could: sticks, shovels, pitchforks, even kitchen ladles. The world expected tears and surrender. Instead, the aliens were greeted with the strangest of sights: villagers holding wooden sticks against plasma rifles. The laughter echoed not only through Harfield but across the stars. The aliens broadcasted to their homeworlds, mocking the primates who dared to stand with branches. Entire alien cities roared with amusement, treating humanity like jesters in their imperial circus. One alien commentator laughed so hard that his metallic mask rattled, comparing humans to insects waving straws at fire. This broadcast reached Earth's remaining cities, where people who had already lost everything could only stare in shame. Yet somewhere within that shame, anger stirred. Among the villagers stood Sergeant Mason Hale, a man once feared in war but long forgotten in peace. He was gaunt, scarred, and weary, but his eyes burned when he heard the aliens laugh. To him, the sound was not just arrogance, it was opportunity. He knew something the aliens did not. He had spent his youth fighting in places where technology and numbers meant little, where enemies hid in jungles, mountains, and shadows. He looked at the villagers with their sticks, and saw not a joke but the seeds of defiance. Hale muttered to himself as the aliens mocked, "You think it's the sticks you should fear. It's what comes after." The confrontation in Harfield ended predictably. The aliens scattered the villagers like leaves in a storm. Plasma fire scorched the soil, barns burned, and the stick-wielding defenders were shoved into the dirt. No one died that day only because the aliens thought it funnier to humiliate rather than kill. They marched away laughing, leaving Harfield in ruins and its people broken. But sometimes humiliation is stronger than death. When the aliens departed, the villagers gathered in silence. Their weapons of wood lay charred and useless. But it was then Hale stood before them and said words they would never forget: "They don't fear us because they don't know us. That's their mistake. We'll teach them." At first, the villagers thought he was mad. What could they do against creatures who could vaporize a house with a glance? But Hale reminded them of something the aliens could never understand. Wars were not always won by bigger guns. They were won by patience, by cunning, and by those willing to fight where the enemy least expects. He described how small groups could vanish into forests, and strike only when the enemy relaxed. He spoke of sabotage, of ambushes, of making the occupiers live in fear of shadows. He told them how every scrap of land, every tree, every field could be a weapon if they used it right. Sticks had been a beginning, not an end. The laughter of the aliens was not victory. It was the first mistake of their downfall. The villagers began to listen. Anger hardened into determination. They trained by night in silence, practicing signals, hiding in barns, moving like shadows. Hale taught them how to strike quickly and disappear before the enemy even realized what had happened. The blacksmith learned to shape nails into caltrops to slice alien boots. The farmers discovered how to build pits that could swallow armored machines. Even the children played roles, carrying false messages and learning to distract patrols with games and songs. Harrowfield transformed itself, not into a fortress, but into a phantom. Every face carried both fear and fire. Every heart carried the same thought. They laughed at us once. Let them laugh again. Far above, in orbit, the alien commanders replayed the footage of Harrowfield with delight. They repeated it again and again, watching humans with sticks face soldiers clad in plasma shields. It was hilarious to them, a perfect example of their superiority. They considered keeping Harrowfield alive just so they could revisit it for sport. None of them noticed that in the background of one frame, Hale had not looked afraid. He had looked amused. The Empire did not recognize the danger of a man smiling in the ashes. The next day, an alien patrol vanished on the edge of Harrowfield's forest. At first, the Empire dismissed it as technical failure. But when a second patrol vanished, and then a third, unease rippled among their ranks. They searched the woods and found nothing but footprints and broken branches. Yet hidden in the shadows, Hale and his villagers whispered and prepared. The War of Sticks had ended. The War of Shadows was about to begin. The aliens had mocked them once, and for that, they would never stop running from the sound of laughter again. The night swallowed Harrowfield in silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the soft crunch of boots in the forest. Masson Hale moved like a shadow, the villagers trailing behind him with their makeshift weapons and newly learned discipline. The aliens believed themselves untouchable, wrapped in armor and arrogance, but Hale knew better. He had fought enemies who melted into jungles, who turned patience into a weapon sharper than any blade. He told the villagers again and again that war was not about fairness, it was about survival. They would not fight the aliens where the Empire was strongest, but where it was weakest. He called it the rules of an unfair game, and the villagers nodded, for unfair was all they had left. Their first target was not a soldier but a supply line. Alien convoys moved through the countryside carrying glowing containers of fuel and food, escorted by mechanical walkers that looked like armored beasts. The villagers studied their patterns, counting how long each convoy took to move, how often they stopped, how many soldiers guarded them. Hale insisted they watch for days before even touching the enemy. Some grew impatient, eager for revenge, but he silenced them with a single sentence. We strike only when the laughers look away. On the fifth night, the opportunity came. A convoy stopped near the woods to repair a broken vehicle. The soldiers stood carelessly, their glowing rifles slung over their shoulders. The villagers crawled through the undergrowth, hearts pounding, sticks replaced now with stolen blades and a few crude explosives made from fertilizer and stolen chemicals. Hale whispered a signal, and the forest erupted. Nets of sharpened stakes fell from the trees, ropes tangled the legs of the machines, and fire rolled across the dry grass where the villagers had soaked the earth with oil. The aliens staggered, shocked that insects dared to strike. By the time they fired their plasma rifles, the villagers were gone, and so were the supplies. When the wreckage was discovered, the alien commanders scoffed. A few stolen crates meant nothing. The Empire had enough fuel and food to feed 1,000 worlds. But beneath their laughter simmered irritation. Reports came in of patrols harassed by unseen enemies, of equipment sabotaged, of soldiers ambushed in the dead of night. The aliens tried to explain it away as local mischief, not a threat. Their arrogance remained, but cracks began to form. Soldiers spoke of forests whispering with human ghosts, of sticks sharpened into spikes hidden beneath the soil, of children who smiled and vanished before an explosion ripped apart a road. They began to sleep less soundly. Hale smiled grimly when he heard this, for fear was the first victory. The villagers adapted quickly. The blacksmith forged crude traps from scrap metal, the farmers learned to carve paths through fields that only they could navigate, and the hunters taught how to move silently through the woods. What had begun as a ragtag defense of sticks became something sharper, cleverer, more dangerous. They struck at night, cutting power lines that fed alien camps, poisoning water supplies with harmless but foul-tasting herbs that left soldiers gagging, and scattering decoys of glowing stones to lure patrols into swamps. The aliens, unused to an enemy who would not stand and fight directly, grew frustrated. They had been trained to crush armies, not chase shadows. The Empire had prepared for missiles and tanks, not for farmers with torches and patience. Still, they refused to acknowledge the threat. In their councils, alien leaders declared that these small victories were insignificant. Let them scurry, one general sneered, they are nothing more than rats in a field. Yet even as they spoke, their soldiers bled, and their machines failed. A convoy of medicine vanished without a trace. A communications tower collapsed after villagers disguised as shepherds cut its foundations. Each time, Hale ordered not just destruction but mockery. At one burned site, the villagers left behind a bundle of sticks tied into the shape of an alien helmet. At another, they arranged branches into smiling faces across the road. When the aliens saw these, their laughter curdled into rage. What had once been comedy now tasted like humiliation. The Empire answered with brutality. Villages were burned, livestock slaughtered, families dragged into camps as examples of what happened to rebels. Harrowfield itself saw soldiers storm through its streets again, demanding to know where the guerrillas hid. But the villagers had learned silence, and silence was deadlier than any weapon. No one betrayed Hale, not even under the threat of death. The more the aliens punished, the more the resistance grew. From town to town, word spread of the villagers who turned sticks into weapons, who mocked the Empire with fire and laughter of their own. Soon, guerrilla bands rose in other places, led by farmers, miners, and teachers who copied Hale's methods. Humanity was learning quickly, and the aliens did not see the pattern until it was too late. Alien broadcasts shifted from laughter to warnings. They declared that humans who resisted were nothing more than cowards hiding in shadows, unworthy of honor. Yet their voices shook with the strain of constant loss. Their soldiers whispered in secret about the futility of chasing enemies who never fought fair. Some began to doubt, and doubt is poison in an army. Hale knew this. He understood that every night the aliens failed to sleep, every time they jumped at the snap of a twig, they weakened. This was the heart of guerrilla war, to make the enemy fight themselves in their own minds. The greatest shock came when the aliens realized the commander had vanished. His transport had been ambushed in a mountain pass, and when they found the wreckage, there was no body. Rumors spread that the humans had captured him. The Empire dismissed this as impossible, but in their hearts, their certainty faltered. For the first time, they began to fear that the insects with sticks had teeth. Hale had indeed taken a prisoner, hidden deep in a cave where villagers guarded him. Yet instead of cruelty, they showed him strange kindness, feeding him, speaking to him, and treating him less like a god and more like a man. Slowly, cracks widened in the alien's composure. He spoke of the Empire's arrogance, its hunger for dominance, and in his words Hale saw a weapon far greater than sticks. He saw knowledge, and knowledge was always sharper than steel. By the time the second month of resistance began, the Empire's tone had changed. No longer did they broadcast laughter. Their messages carried threats, promises of annihilation, and fury. But the villagers no longer cowered when they heard those words. They only smiled, for they understood something the Empire did not. The war was no longer between sticks and plasma. It was between arrogance and patience, between shadows and pride. The unfair game had begun, and humanity was learning the rules faster than their conquerors could bear. The forest became a weapon. Mason Hale had long understood that the land itself could fight if you knew how to wield it. The villagers dug pits in the soil and lined them with sharpened branches. They hung logs with ropes and balanced them carefully, ready to swing like hammers when cut loose. They coated sticks with resin and tar, planting them in the ground so that even a stumble would end in fire. What the aliens had once mocked now turned into instruments of chaos. Machines designed to crush armored divisions suddenly found themselves crippled by hidden traps. Soldiers who laughed at humans carrying sticks screamed when those same sticks snapped their limbs in crude but effective snares. The war had shifted. It was no longer villagers defending themselves. It was hunters stalking prey. The first true victory came in the shadow of the Black Hollow cliffs. A column of alien walkers, great machines that towered over the trees, marched along a narrow road. The villagers had spent days preparing, carving out weaknesses in the cliff walls, planting traps along the path, and building diversions that would confuse the machines. When the convoy entered, the villagers triggered the collapse. Tons of rock crashed down, pinning the walkers in place. As the aliens scrambled to cut through the debris, firebombs rolled down from above, bursting into waves of heat and flame. The aliens' plasma rifles answered, searing through stone, but the villagers had already vanished into tunnels carved through the cliffs. The machines, designed to fight armies, burned in an inferno set by farmers. That day, Hale knew the balance had shifted. They could bleed the Empire. What unsettled the aliens more than the losses was the mockery left behind. After the Black Hollow ambush, they found charred wood arranged into crude smiling faces around the wreckage. Another time, after a patrol disappeared in the marshes, they discovered sticks bound together into a cross with the words, in clumsy alien script, "Laugh louder next time." The villagers had begun to weaponize not only their forests and their fire but also humor. What once made the Empire roar with laughter now turned back upon them, twisting arrogance into humiliation. Soldiers who once jeered at the thought of sticks now destroyed any they found in paranoia, only to discover too late that cutting one stick often triggered a trap of 20 more. In retaliation, the Empire unleashed fire across the land. Entire fields were scorched, villages leveled, and families executed publicly to send a message. Yet brutality only fed the resistance. Survivors fled into the forests, swelling the ranks of Hale's fighters. Anger burned hotter than fear, and every act of cruelty drove more hearts into the shadows. Even the children learned roles, carrying signals, planting decoys, and singing songs that misled alien patrols into dead ends. The Empire found itself fighting not an army but a whole people, invisible yet everywhere. Hale told them often that fear was their greatest weapon, and the Empire was learning to fear. Still, the aliens possessed power unmatched. Their ships ruled the skies, their weapons incinerated stone, and their machines could flatten towns with a step. Every time Hale struck, he knew the retaliation would be brutal. He moved constantly, never letting the guerrillas stay in one place long enough to be destroyed. The resistance lived in caves, in tree hollows, in the ruins of barns. Nights were cold, food was scarce, and the faces of the fallen haunted their dreams. Yet in every whispered firelight conversation, there was a new kind of laughter. It was bitter, but it was theirs, the laughter of people who knew the mighty could bleed. The war of shadows deepened with psychological tricks. Hale ordered his fighters to capture alien transmissions, twist them into parodies, and broadcast them back. The aliens had once aired the footage of Hairfield's sticks to mock humanity. Now villagers cut and edited that same footage, overlaying it with alien screams from recent ambushes, turning laughter into reminders of failure. The broadcast spread like wildfire, slipping through alien channels, leaking into their own camps. Soldiers who once laughed at humans now heard their commanders humiliated in their own voices. Doubt festered. Hale knew it was working when he heard rumors of alien soldiers refusing to patrol without reinforcements. It was in the midst of this rising tension that the villagers captured their first alien alive. It happened after a supply transport was struck in the foothills. Amid the wreckage, a soldier was pinned under twisted metal, his glowing armor cracked. Instead of finishing him, Hale ordered the villagers to drag him into hiding. The alien expected torture, braced himself for cruelty, but none came. Instead, he was fed, bound gently, and questioned. Hale asked him about his people, about their empire, about their weakness. At first, the alien sneered, refusing to speak. But over time, the kindness unsettled him. To his people, humans were vermin, yet here he was alive only because of their mercy. He confessed small things at first, then larger ones, until he spoke of the weaknesses in their command structure, the rigid pride that blinded their generals, the cracks in their empire's armor. This knowledge was more powerful than any weapon, and Hale knew it. The alien commanders, desperate to end the resistance, deployed entire battalions to crush the guerrillas. They swept through forests, combed valleys, and flooded caves with gas. Yet the more they pressed, the more they lost. Machines jammed with sticks in their joints, collapsing into useless hulks. Fire licked through their camps at night, ignited by crude torches. Soldiers disappeared into the mist, never to return. The villagers had become like the land itself, impossible to root out, always striking from the dark. The Empire had laughed once, but now their laughter was gone, replaced by frustration that curdled into fear. The turning point came when the villagers staged their boldest ambush yet. They lured a commander into believing a surrender was genuine, waving white cloths and stepping forward empty-handed. The aliens lowered their weapons, smug and confident, only for the ground to erupt beneath them. Hidden tunnels spilled forth fighters who struck fast, seizing weapons, cutting down soldiers, and dragging the commander into the shadows. The Empire was forced to retreat in disgrace, leaving behind broken machines and a leader stolen before their eyes. Across the galaxy, word spread that Earth had bloodied the Empire. What was once a joke had become a warning. Humanity was no longer comedy. It was contagion. Hale stood with his villagers in the aftermath, looking upon the smoldering remains of alien war machines. He knew the price had been high. Too many faces were missing from their ranks, too many homes reduced to ash. But he also knew something greater had been born. The Empire had finally realized what it meant to fight a people who refused to bow, who turned sticks into symbols of defiance. The war was far from over, but Hale felt the tide had shifted. For the first time since the invasion began, the villagers no longer saw themselves as victims. They saw themselves as warriors. The Empire had taught them humiliation, and now they would teach the Empire fear. The Empire's arrogance began to fracture. Whispers spread among their soldiers that Earth was cursed, that the humans carried shadows inside their bones, that no matter how many villages were burned, the defiance only multiplied. In distant command chambers, alien generals argued. Some demanded the annihilation of every settlement with orbital fire, scorched Earth that would leave nothing alive. Others hesitated, warning that such brutality might spark rebellion across other worlds under their control. To the Empire, reputation was power. For centuries they had conquered without serious resistance. Their image as unstoppable gods kept entire civilizations bowed. But now that image was cracking, and the more humans mocked them with laughter and crude symbols, the more the galaxy itself began to doubt. Their pride became their prison. On Earth, Hale and the villagers felt the shift. For months they had been hunted, pushed, and cornered, but now they sensed uncertainty in their enemy. Patrols marched less confidently. Soldiers fired too quickly, rattled by every rustling branch. Hale recognized the moment for what it was. The hunters had become unsettled prey. He urged his people to press harder, to attack not only with weapons but with imagination. The villagers began staging false camps, scattering remnants of meals and blankets in open fields only to line the edges with traps. Alien squads stormed them, believing they had found the resistance, only to be torn apart by explosions hidden under cooking pots and sticks sharpened into caltrops. The villagers left behind more mocking signs, sometimes a bundle of firewood arranged into an alien's helmet, sometimes a crude drawing of an alien slipping on mud. Every joke cut deeper than a blade. The captured alien commander, held in a cavern hidden beneath the hills, became both a puzzle and a tool. At first he refused to speak, consumed by his pride, but day after day of human patience wore at him. Hale treated him not as a beast but as a man, binding him only lightly and feeding him the same food the villagers ate. The commander began to talk, not through interrogation but through the strange relief of conversation. He spoke of the Empire's hunger for dominance, how their rulers feared appearing weak. He confessed that many soldiers had begun to question why they fought here, why they bled on a world that should have fallen easily. Hale listened carefully, drawing maps in the dirt from the aliens' descriptions, piecing together a picture of an empire brittle beneath its gleaming armor. He realized that their arrogance was more than a flaw, it was a disease. One night, as rain poured over the forest, Hale gathered his closest fighters. He spoke of using the enemy's pride against them. Instead of hiding, they would lure an alien commander into a trap by pretending to surrender. It was dangerous, perhaps suicidal, but if it succeeded, it would shatter the Empire's image. The villagers agreed without hesitation. They had lost too much to fear death now. When the day came, they stood in a meadow waving white cloths, their weapons hidden. Alien ships descended, their commander smugly walking forward, broadcasting the surrender across the Empire's networks. But the villagers had dug tunnels beneath the meadow. At Hale's signal, the ground erupted as fighters surged out, striking with fire and steel. The aliens reeled, stunned by the audacity. Their commander was dragged screaming into the earth before his soldiers could react. Within minutes, the meadow was empty again, except for the laughter of villagers echoing from the tunnels. The Empire had suffered humiliation greater than any loss of ships or weapons. They had been tricked. The capture of the second commander sent shockwaves across the Empire. Soldiers spoke of humans not as insects but as demons who could vanish into the ground itself. Rumors spread of curses, of entire units swallowed by forests alive with hatred. The alien high command raged, demanding explanations. Some officers proposed abandoning Earth entirely, cutting their losses before more damage was done. But pride chained them. To retreat would be to admit weakness, to admit that an empire built on invincibility could be broken by sticks and shadows. Instead, they poured more troops onto the planet, tightening their grip, even as the costs grew heavier each day. Among the villagers, the victories were celebrated with grim satisfaction. They had lost friends, homes, and lives, but now they carried hope like a torch. Other regions began to rise as news spread. Guerrilla bands appeared in mountains, deserts, and ruined cities. Humanity learned from each other, adapting Hale's methods to their own lands. Miners collapsed tunnels on marching machines, fishermen set fires on riverbanks to lure soldiers into ambushes, shepherds used their flocks to confuse alien sensors. Earth itself had become a labyrinth of resistance. Hale felt the weight of what they had begun. The fight was no longer about Harrowfield alone. It was about every human still alive under the shadow of alien rule. The alien commanders attempted to counter with greater technology. They unleashed drones that scanned forests, machines that could smell human sweat, weapons that vaporized entire clearings. Yet technology stumbled where cunning thrived. The villagers used smoke, mud, and even animal dung to confuse the machines. They planted decoys of heat and sound that drew drones into nets. Hunters led soldiers into swamps where heavy armor sank into muck. Hale taught his people that every strength could be twisted into weakness if you understood it. Slowly, painfully, the Empire learned the truth of his words. But with every triumph came cost. The Empire punished captured villages with merciless cruelty. Families were broken, towns erased from maps, forests burned until nothing remained but ash. Hale carried those losses like stones in his chest. At night he remembered the faces of the fallen, those who had laughed with him by fires now extinguished forever. He questioned himself, wondered if defiance was worth the price. Yet every time he faltered, he remembered the laughter of the aliens on that first day in Harrowfield, the sound of gods mocking mortals. He swore never to let that laughter stand as the last word of humanity. The world burned brighter with defiance than with fire. Across Earth, whispers of resistance had grown into roars. Villages that once cowered in silence now carved spears, built traps, and set ambushes. Cities buried in rubble became nests of sabotage, where children carried messages through sewers and women traded food in secret for stolen alien batteries. What began in Harrowfield with sticks had ignited across continents. Humanity was not just surviving. It was fighting. The Empire's commanders seethed, their pride wounded beyond repair. They no longer saw the planet as a conquest but as a wound festering inside their empire, a reminder that even the smallest creatures could mock the giants. And so they decided to end it with one final strike. Rumors spread of a weapon beyond comprehension. The aliens called it the Scourge, a device designed to erase entire regions in a single pulse of energy. It was said to drain the life from the land itself, leaving nothing but ash and silence. Scouts reported that construction had begun in the heart of a fortified base, a place bristling with machines and guarded by legions. When Hale heard of it, he felt a chill colder than any winter. For months, they had fought to make the Empire bleed. But if the scourge was unleashed, all their victories would mean nothing. It was the end of Earth itself. Yet as he looked into the eyes of his villagers, scarred but unbroken, he knew they would not bow. They would strike the scourge before it could strike them. The plan was madness, but guerrilla war thrived on madness. Hale gathered his fighters, men and women who had already given more than anyone had the right to ask. He explained that they would not storm the base with armies or guns. They would slip inside like ghosts, sabotage the scourge from within, and destroy it before it could awaken. The villagers listened in silence. Some clenched fists, others nodded slowly. None turned away. They had seen too much to fear death. To them, survival meant nothing without defiance. That night, beneath the canopy of a forest alive with the songs of insects, Hale told them the truth. This could be the last fight. If we fail, we burn. If we succeed, we may still burn. But the world will remember we fought. The villagers laughed softly, not from joy but from something deeper, the laughter of people who knew there was no turning back. The journey to the base was a gauntlet of danger. Alien patrols stalked the roads, drones buzzed above the trees, and scanners swept the skies. Yet the villagers moved with the patience of shadows, slipping past sensors with decoys, masking their heat with mud, and leading patrols astray with false trails. They carried with them not plasma weapons but bundles of fire, ropes of steel, and crude explosives packed into barrels. Every step forward felt like walking into the jaws of death. Yet the closer they drew, the more determined they became. Even the children of Harrowfield, now older and hardened by war, helped carry supplies, whispering songs that had once been lullabies but now sounded like hymns of battle. The base itself was a fortress. Towers of black metal rose into the sky, ringed with machines that pulsed with alien energy. At its heart, encased in a dome of shimmering shields, the scourge glowed faintly, a weapon still slumbering but hungry to awaken. To face it directly was impossible. To outthink it was the only choice. Hale ordered his fighters to split into groups, each tasked with sabotage. One group would lure the guards with decoys, another would cut power lines hidden beneath the soil, and a third would infiltrate through drainage tunnels carved long ago for rainwater. Hale himself led the final group, carrying the last of their crude explosives, determined to reach the scourge no matter the cost. The attack began with a distraction so absurd it almost felt like a joke. Villagers dragged bundles of sticks into the open field and lit them, waving them like spears as they shouted. The aliens, still stung by the memory of their first laughter, could not resist answering with overwhelming force. Plasma fire tore through the night, incinerating the decoys, while the real fighters slipped unseen into the shadows. Explosions rippled through the base as power lines snapped, throwing sections of the fortress into darkness. Alarms wailed, machines screeched, and in the chaos the villagers surged forward. The scourge's shield flickered as its generators were sabotaged. Hale and his group crawled through the drainage tunnels, emerging beneath the dome itself. There, at last, he saw the weapon that promised to end his world. It pulsed like a heart of fire, each beat threatening annihilation. Reaching it was not simple. Guards swarmed, machines scanned for movement, and the air crackled with energy. But the villagers had prepared. They used stolen alien grenades to blast gaps in defenses, hurled fire into machinery to blind sensors, and fought with a desperation born not of victory but of survival. Hale himself carried the final barrel of explosives, dragging it through the chaos as if carrying the weight of humanity on his back. He could feel his body breaking, but he pressed on, every step a vow. He thought of Harrowfield's fields, of the laughter of his people, of the humiliation on the first day of invasion. He thought of the aliens mocking their sticks. He would make this barrel the last laugh. They reached the heart of the scourge. The weapon glowed brighter, as though aware of their presence, its power building to ignite. Hale ordered his fighters to cover him, and they did, throwing themselves against the alien guards in a final act of defiance. He dragged the barrel beneath the weapon, lit the fuse, and whispered not a prayer but a curse. Then he turned, shouting for his people to run. The explosion erupted like thunder, shaking the earth and ripping the night apart. Fire surged, metal screamed, and the scourge shuddered, collapsing inward before it could awaken. The dome exploded, shards of alien glass raining like stars, and the fortress was swallowed in a storm of fire. The villagers staggered out into the night, their numbers halved, their bodies burned, but alive. Behind them the scourge lay in ruins, its pieces smoldering like broken bones. The aliens reeled, their pride shattered once again. Across the galaxy, news spread that Earth had destroyed the Empire's greatest weapon with nothing more than cunning, sacrifice, and fire. Humanity's laughter, once mocked, now rang in alien ears like a haunting melody. They had survived the impossible, and in surviving, they had won more than a battle. They had stolen the Empire's image of invincibility. The scourge, meant to erase Earth, had become its rallying cry. For the first time, Hale allowed himself a breath of hope, even as smoke and ash clung to his lungs. The war was not over, but the laughter of Styx had become the laughter of survival, and survival was a victory greater than conquest. The Empire retreated, not with honor but with desperation. Their ships lifted from the scorched fields, engines roaring as if to drown out the silence of their failure. They had come to Earth laughing at sticks and stones, confident that their technology made them gods. Now they left humiliated, their pride in tatters, their soldiers whispering of shadows and forests, and traps sprung from the simplest branches. To the galaxy beyond, the retreat was a thunderclap. For the first time in generations, the Empire had been forced backward, not by rival fleets or advanced weapons, but by farmers, children, and villagers who had turned defiance into a weapon sharper than plasma. The invincible had bled, and when gods bleed, mortals everywhere take notice. On Earth, the silence that followed was heavy with both relief and sorrow. Villages lay in ruins, cities stood in rubble, and fields were scorched black. The survivors stumbled from hiding places to see a world forever changed. Families reunited in tears, but the absence of the fallen weighed heavily in every embrace. In Harrowfield, where it had all begun, the villagers gathered at the square, a place once filled with laughter and later with ash. Mason Hale stood among them, scarred and weary, a man who had given everything he had. He looked upon the faces of his people and knew that though they had won, victory carried a cost too deep to measure. Yet in their eyes he also saw something unbroken. They were no longer simply villagers. They were warriors who had shown the universe that sticks could break empires. As weeks passed, the remnants of the Empire's occupation crumbled. Alien technology was abandoned, rusting in fields where once it had marched like gods of war. Humans scavenged what they could, learning to combine fragments of alien machines with their own tools. Children played with scraps of armor, pretending to topple giants, their laughter no longer fearful but triumphant. What had been instruments of terror became toys of defiance, symbols that the Empire's power was not eternal. Even in ruin, Earth began to rebuild itself. Farmers planted seeds in burned soil, blacksmiths reforged shattered metal into plows, and teachers told stories of how their people had mocked the mightiest army in the stars. Slowly, life began again, fragile but determined. But not all aliens left. Among the prisoners were officers who had tasted defeat and realized something their leaders never could. They saw in humanity a strength that was not born of weapons but of will. A few asked to stay behind, not as conquerors but as students. They wished to learn how a people armed with nothing more than sticks and courage could undo an empire's pride. Some humans wanted to kill them, to avenge the dead, but Hale intervened. He told his people that the greatest victory was not in destruction, but in turning enemies into allies. Reluctantly, the villagers agreed, and in time, those aliens who remained began to work alongside them, helping rebuild what their empire had destroyed. It was an uneasy peace, but it was real. Hale himself felt the weight of years press upon him. His scars burned in the night, his body ached with wounds that would never heal, and his mind carried the names of every fighter lost in the shadows. Yet he knew his work was not finished. Across the galaxy, whispers of Earth's defiance spread like fire. Worlds long bent under the Empire's heel began to stir. Rebellions sparked in distant colonies, inspired not by fleets or weapons but by the story of humans with sticks who had made the invincible retreat. Hale realized that Earth had become a symbol far greater than itself. They had shown that no empire was beyond breaking, that no arrogance was beyond humbling. Their war was not just for survival. It had lit a flame of freedom across the stars. One evening, as the sun set over the battered fields of Harefield, Hale stood among the ruins of a barn, watching children play. They had found sticks, just as their parents once had, and were pretending to fight alien soldiers. They laughed, tumbling in the dust, striking at invisible foes with wild swings. The sound was not cruel but joyful, a reminder that laughter no longer belonged to the conquerors. A small boy raised his stick high and shouted, "This is my sword." The others cheered, and Hale felt something shift in his chest. For the first time since the invasion, he laughed without bitterness. The world was scarred, but the spirit of its people had survived. That spirit, he knew, could never be conquered. The Empire did not forget its defeat. In distant halls of power, their leaders raged, plotting vengeance, but they found their own foundations crumbling. Other species began to question the myth of invincibility, rising against their rule. Resources stretched thin, rebellions flared, and cracks spread through their dominion. What had begun in Harefield with sticks had rippled outward until the galaxy itself shook. The Empire had thought Earth a small, insignificant world. Instead, it had become the spark of something far greater than conquest. It had become the birthplace of resistance. Hale knew the future was uncertain. More battles might come, more sacrifices demanded, and Earth would carry its scars for generations. Yet he also knew that no matter what came, humanity had proven itself. They had endured humiliation, fire, and death, and yet they had stood, fought, and laughed. The Empire could never take that away. The sticks that once made the galaxy laugh had become a legend, a story told in whispers and shouts alike. They were no longer just sticks. They were symbols, reminders that even the smallest hands could strike fear into the greatest of powers. As night fell, the villagers gathered for the first true celebration since the invasion began. They lit fires not for war but for warmth, cooked meals not stolen but earned, and sang songs not of mourning but of triumph. Old and young, scarred and whole, they laughed together beneath the stars. Among them sat Hale, silent but smiling, his heart heavy with the memory of the fallen but lifted by the sound of life returning. He raised a cup in a quiet toast, not to victory but to survival, to the stubborn, unbreakable spirit of his people. In that moment, the war truly ended. And so the story closed where it had begun. Once, the aliens had laughed at humans with sticks, believing the fight already won. Now, humanity laughed in return, not in mockery but in triumph. The galaxy would remember that laughter, not as a joke but as a warning. For it was the sound of a people who had faced gods with nothing but branches in their hands and had shown that no empire, no matter how mighty, could withstand the will of those who refused to bow.